WisconsinEye's Campaign 2024 programming is sponsored by Wisconsin Counties Association, Nicolet National Bank, Wisconsin Hospital Association, Operating Engineers Local 139, the Wisconsin Realtors Association, the Wisconsin Laborers District Council, and North Central State's Regional Council of Carpenters. To support programs like this, please consider a tax-deductible donation at wiseye.org/donate or by texting WisCI to 44321.
Representative Mike Baer of Verona is the Democrat incumbent candidate for the 80th Assembly District. The election is November 5th. Representative Baer, welcome to WisconsinEye.
Thank you, Lisa. Thanks for having me, and thanks for all you and the team at WisCI do here to help voters know what's going on around the state.
Well, thanks for participating in our candidate interview. I'll start by asking you, what is your campaign's key message, and why are you running for this office?
Well, I'm very excited about this year. We've got new maps and opportunity for Democrats to get to a majority, and that gives us opportunities to make progress on things that voters are asking us to work hard on. And my three main things that I've been talking to voters about, I just went through a primary, and so knocked on 13,000 doors and sort of been well practiced in talking with voters and hearing what they're concerned about. I think number one is our democracy. And Donald Trump and his allies have been far too successful at eroding people's confidence in what's going on, and we should try our best to roll that back. Second, we need to make sure that we're protecting our rights and restoring rights that have been taken away over the last couple of years. Rights to abortion, rights to voting, things that people think are fundamental in our system that we desperately need to make some progress on getting back to where we were on those issues. And then third, making investments in our community. New part of the 80th Assembly District is the City of Madison and the Madison School District that are both going to referendum this year. Which is a tough ask of voters when we're sitting on a $3 billion surplus at the state level. So making investments to make sure our schools are strong, that we're protecting our environment, and making investments for the future so that we have places that we want to live in that are livable. And that's what voters have been asking for and what we really need to be working hard on.
So if you're elected, what's an example of a bill that would be a priority for you to introduce? Yeah,
I think one of the main things that I'm hearing from folks is cost of living rising and wages not keeping up with inflation. And so in this past session, I introduced a couple of bills that would implement tax credits for people who are owning or renting their home, tax credit for workers, the earned income tax credit. We have a state supplement that we ought to increase that was cut a number of years ago, and we should go back and have it indexed to inflation. So I'd like to introduce those bills again and really try to help working people afford the bills these days, which are going up.
You know that if you're reelected, you're entering during a biennial budget year. You mentioned the state projected to have more than a $3 billion surplus. What are your top two priorities for use of that surplus funding?
Right. Well, I think we have an opportunity with the amount that it is, over $3 billion at this point, to do a combination of tax relief, some of the things I just talked about, help workers, help working people be able to afford to live right now, and make those investments in the community that I talked about. We need to make sure that our K-12 system is strong, that our university system is strong, that we have investments there, and that we're investing in workers and making sure that they have opportunities to succeed right now.
So you mentioned K-12 education. It is a leading issue for many voters. You mentioned wanting to make some investment there. What do you see as working well in K-12 education and maybe what needs to be improved?
Well, our teachers across the state are wonderful, and our communities have made big investments in schools and are continuing to make those investments and being asked more and more through referendum to make those investments. And we're at a point where with this budget surplus, we ought not to be asking voters for more. We've got what we need. We can invest in that and make sure that students are set up for success going into the future. We shouldn't be seeing any going back. We should be going forward only.
So increase education funding across the board?
Sure, we need to increase funding. The governor has a commitment to that and signed had a creative veto in the last cycle to make sure that our per pupil increases go on for quite a while. And we certainly need to continue making those investments. We also need to invest in students who are in special education. The governor has proposed increasing that. It fluctuates around 30%, and we ought to at least double that. We really ought to provide 100% from the state level so that there's equity in special ed across the state. Our teachers are wonderful people that commit their lives. My two kids in public schools watching them, thrive and succeed is really just so fulfilling for me as a parent. And I want to make sure every kid has that opportunity, not just in districts where referendums are being approved. Haves already have. We need the have-nots to also have some too. So we have got the funding, and we can make those investments and make sure that our teachers are respected again. I think they have a very difficult job. They need respect. They need space to do their job. And we need to make sure that they have a seat back at the bargaining table so that they've got good benefits and good pay.
You referenced higher education briefly. What does the future of Wisconsin's higher education system, the 4-year colleges, 2-year colleges, technical colleges, what does that future look like to you, and what's the legislature's role in that?
Yeah, well, the Republicans have been using UW and the system schools as a punching bag for the last couple of years, which I think is unfortunate because it's one of the bedrocks of our state, one of our economic drivers, and one of the things that sets us apart from other states. And if we can continue making investments in it, it will continue to be that bedrock and be that thing that returns to us. And we ought to redouble those efforts and try to make up for things that have been lost over the past couple of years.
Increase funding then across 4-year and 2-year?
And Governor Evers has made a big, strong commitment coming in his next budget to increase funding for universities and for technical schools. We've got to do both. And again, with the budget surplus, we've got money. We've got an opportunity to do that.
What do you see as the state's largest workforce development challenge, and how would you propose to address it?
I think it's the fact that wages haven't kept up with costs. And we can do things through tax relief to help people and to help employers provide more for their workers and increase the benefits that are available. There's a bill I'm working on with the Republican actually to create a state facilitated retirement program for employees whose employers don't offer one. So there's a lot of things that we can do and a lot of things we ought to do. The governor had a whole special session that he called on workforce development, and that was one of the few special sessions where some progress was made, where some bills were passed, and we did some things like helping parents with who have children in child care or have dependents who have dependent care costs. And so there are things that we can do. We know this, and again, with funding with the surplus, we can make some progress to help our workers across the state.
Another workforce question. Investments in public and energy infrastructure grow our state's economy. This also provides an opportunity to invest in our state's workforce, but currently there are no requirements for hiring local workers. Would you support a state resident hiring requirement for state, local, and utility scale infrastructure investments?
Sure. There's no question we have to green our economy. There's no question we have to start local on that effort. It benefits the environment. It benefits our economy. And there's no reason not to at this point. The days of denial on climate change and the reasons not to go green are far past us. We don't even need to have that debate anymore. We need to be focused on what are the things that we can do today, right now, to make sure that everybody can be part of this green economy. I think that's one of the things that I learned, out knocking doors this year and talking to voters is people want to be part of the solution, but not everybody can afford the expensive electric car or can afford to put solar panels on their roof. So we really have to make an effort to make sure that there are incentives available, that everybody can be part of the solution.
You support a state resident hiring requirement
Sure.
then? Employee classification is an issue in the construction industry. Some employers misclassify workers as independent contractors or pay them in cash off the books. This lowers costs by avoiding payroll taxes and unemployment insurance, and it puts compliant companies at a disadvantage when bidding on projects. Plus, misclassified workers may be denied minimum wage protections or overtime pay. Are you aware of this, and what do you think should be done about it?
Yeah, fully aware. I was part of the State Affairs Committee that had a hearing on this particular issue in the last session. It's an issue where we have agreement on both sides of the aisle and agreement among employers and workers and unions. There's not a lot of issues where that happens, and I think this is one of the things where people look at state government and look at government generally and say, "Why, just get something done, do something for us." And this is an issue where I think progress is certainly possible. So having sat through that committee hearing all sides of this argument, in general agreement that this is something we need to fix, there's got to be a solution out there that's going to work.
What is the solution?
Well, to make sure that we are not misclassifying. That's the main solution. Make sure that workers are doing the work that they are hired to do, that they are certified to do, and not going around those requirements and making sure that they're protected on in their workplace.
Moving on to housing. Affordable rental housing is an issue in Wisconsin. Some support government-imposed rent control to maintain affordability, while others argue keeping rent artificially low will decrease rental supply, resulting in increased prices. What is your sense of housing as an issue, and which best addresses rental housing affordability? Is it rent control or building more rentals or something else?
Well, you're asking the right guy this question. Rent control, that's one of my bills that I introduced, and it's part of a larger effort to allow local governments to do what's called inclusionary zoning. You can't do one without the other. So by doing inclusionary zoning, a government would be able to say to a developer, we want a certain percent of what you're building to be for affordable housing. That's currently preempted by state law, as is rent control. So my bill would allow for that to happen again. But it's not to say that's the only solution for housing right now. I'm representing a district where everything west of the Beltline in Madison, Verona, west side of Madison, Cross Plains, town of Middleton, these are communities that are growing very quickly. And the folks I'm talking to who are living in duplexes and apartments and condos, they want to get out into the neighborhoods where there are good schools. But there's just not stock available right now. So there's a lack of supply for the large demand we have, especially in this quickly growing community. And it's not just us, it's an issue across the state. So working in a bipartisan way on the Housing Committee last session, I give Chairman Burks a lot of credit on this issue. We invested $500 million in affordable workforce housing. And we started those conversations talking about a full $1 billion. We ended up at only a half. So I think we can go back and probably make some more progress on those investments. Housing, a huge issue, huge demand in this area, especially in the district that I'm representing and want to continue to represent. And those communities are gated by price. And I don't think that's not the situation anybody wants to live in, where a teacher can't afford to move into our community, a firefighter can't afford to stay in our community. That doesn't set us up for success for the future.
Transitioning to healthcare. Medical systems are facing numerous headwinds in the form of inflation, workforce development, and issues around Medicare and Medicaid reimbursement, resulting in fewer services and even the closure of a hospital system in western Wisconsin. What would you do to preserve access to care and prevent future closures? Yeah,
those closures, again, another issue that we heard about in the State Affairs Committee in the Eau Claire area. Heartbreaking for that community that's the sort of result of the worst case scenario of what can happen in our healthcare system in America and in Wisconsin. We have a role in state government, and our role is to prevent something like that from happening, and we didn't. I think that's a failure on us. There was also a failure to respond. Republicans were holding on to money in the Joint Finance Committee that could have been helpful. That money should have been released earlier and quickly to get out there to help that community. I think luckily that community has come together at a local level to try to find some solutions, and other interests have come in to help as well. But we should never get to that situation. And again, hearing from voters about the struggles that they have with healthcare, with waiting times, costs of prescription drugs, there are things like our senior care program that we could beef up to help with things like that. So we need to sort of take a comprehensive look at healthcare again, even if it's a third rail issue in politics. There's always been this reluctance to touch this issue, but it's something that voters, I think, are desperately wanting us to try to help them out with.
Do you support increase in Medicaid reimbursement?
Well, I think we have to. There's no question. The providers are struggling, and there's dollars out there available. If we expanded Badger Care, for instance, we'd have billions of dollars at our disposal to help cover those costs and to help increase reimbursement rates, something we can do, other states have done, and we ought to sort of do with some haste.
What about mental health care? Growing concern for many Wisconsinites, also concern for state and county budgets. What are you hearing on this issue in your district, and how would you address it?
Yeah, one of the most enlightening meetings I had over the last 2 years being in the Capitol was with high school students from Verona High School who take part in a statewide effort to bring attention to mental health struggles in schools. And it was a heartbreaking, very difficult conversation, but also one that's really inspiring that they're involved in this and that they come and share their stories with courage. And that's not easy, I think, for a young person to do, to show that vulnerability. And really the thing they're there for is to ask us to help them. And we haven't been there for them. Again, the governor said it was a year of mental health, and we didn't do anything. There was nothing passed. The Republicans stood in the way of trying to help on that issue.
What do you support?
Well, I think we need to help schools. That's the first place to start. Make sure that they've got the social workers and therapists that they need. And it's not just mental health. There's occupational, other things that we're falling behind on, especially with students who have IEPs, who have disabilities, where we know that a little extra help would help them. And back to the issue of funding, they don't have enough money to make that happen for their students. So we need to make sure that that's happening for them.
How should Wisconsin move forward on abortion policy?
Well, abortion gets my full and unconditional support. Abortion is health care. The reversal back to an 1849 law that outlawed abortion in Wisconsin was going far backwards for us. We need to go forward on this issue. Ideally, we would get Tammy Baldwin's bill passed through Congress that would codify Roe into federal law. And then at the state level, we'd add a protection into our state constitution, like some red states have done, like Kansas and Montana has had it for a while, that would protect, that would create a right to privacy, that would protect abortion, contraception, marriage, issues that we know that Clarence Thomas and Sam Alito have been writing about already. These things are on the chopping block. They're in danger. So if we act now, we can help ourselves and help people have access to these things that we know are what they're looking for. And I think abortion is just one part of an issue in terms of women's issues. And it shouldn't just be on women to advocate for these issues. I think it's also on men to be strong advocates for this. Family planning is a family thing. It's not just a woman's issue. And if it's on them to fight, I think we don't make any progress. We all have to be part of this. So there's other issues too. Equal pay, fair pay, making sure that maternal care is covered, and expanding maternal care, especially in Badger care. Plenty of things where there is some bipartisan agreement where we can make some progress to help parents who are really struggling right now.
Let's talk about transportation. What are the pressing transportation needs in your district, and how important is it that these needs are addressed and for the state to keep on schedule with the reconstruction of aging interstates and significant corridors of commerce?
Yeah, so the 80th Assembly District, again, west of the Beltline, these are communities that are almost entirely dependent on cars. And if you don't have a car, if you're a person with a disability, elderly, you can't drive for some reason, you're not part of the economy. You're not part of being able to get to school, to do social things. So we have an economic justice issue here of being entirely car dependent. And one of the reasons why that is the case is Republicans took away our ability to create and facilitate and fund regional transit authorities. So I've been working to draft a bill to bring those back. Working with stakeholders and some of my colleagues, and it's a tough fight. It's a difficult thing to figure out, but our communities are struggling with getting from point A to point B in a way that makes sense, that is not just by car. And we're not the only community that's struggling with that. Certainly around Milwaukee and south, struggling with that as well. And there are transit funding issues in every community that has a transit system. So this isn't just a Madison, Milwaukee thing. This is a thing across the state where people, as an economic justice issue and an economic development issue, if we can invest in our transit systems and getting people from point A to point B, we're much better off. And same goes for roads, and you mentioned highways, and certainly I have heard a number of rural communities who are struggling with their roads, and we worked in a bipartisan way to increase rural road funding in this last session, and I think we can continue to do that sort of thing. Again, it's about having one of those bedrocks of our economy working well and being in good shape. I think our roads are something we used to be proud of in Wisconsin, and it's not so much the case anymore, and we ought to try to get back to that.
What about the environment? For instance, PFAS and other water contaminants are a concern for a growing number of Wisconsinites. Do you see this as an important issue, and how would you propose to address it?
Yeah, it's absolutely an important issue, and I'm shocked. Having been on the Verona City Council, Dane County Board, and now in the State Assembly, the amount of time that I've spent on water, I mean, it's just an enormous amount of time. This district was pounded by a rainstorm that dropped more than a foot of rain a few years ago and created flooding issues, and really, I think, opened people's eyes to some water issues locally. And we've been working over the past couple of years to protect Badger Mill Creek, which flows right through the city of Verona, into the town of Verona, into the Sugar River, where it's got pollutant runoff from the sewage district. So, again, solvable problems that just take funding and take some willpower that we could be working on. And I think the same is true for PFAS, and I think there is a bipartisan agreement that it should be addressed, that we should do something, but the details, I think, are where we're getting tripped up. And the politics is tripping it up as well, where people don't want the governor to have a win on this issue or don't want Democrats to have progress on this issue. This is something that we need to make sure we're taking care of. If we don't take care of Mother Earth, she bats last. We're in trouble then.
We're on to the last two questions. How would you describe the leading differences between you and your opponent?
I don't know my opponent very well. What I can gather is, very Republican, very much on the other side of the aisle. Seems dedicated to public service, which I appreciate, and I give a pat on the back to anybody who's willing to throw their hat and want to try to do this sort of thing. These are difficult jobs, demanding times, difficult times. So I thank him for his willingness to do that. But I truly don't know much about his issue stances, and I hope that voters know that they can continue to trust me to be a strong progressive Democrat working on making progress for our communities.
Final question. Let's say you're reelected, you get this magic wand you can use in the state capitol to resolve one issue in a way that brings all parties together. What is that issue?
Yeah, well, an issue that's close to my heart as a sibling of a person with a disability. My sister Sue is one of the main reasons I do this work. She's been inspiration for me for my whole life. There was an effort a few years ago to end waiting lists for children's long-term care systems, and there was a bipartisan commitment, bipartisan agreement that those are done, it's over. And that didn't turn out to be the case because we didn't fund it in the way that it needed to be funded. So I think if we can go back to that conversation and wave a magic wand and say we're going to change a couple words and make that the case, that there's no more waiting lists to get to these services, I mean, it'd really be amazing to see how many kids would benefit. And similarly, if I get another magic wand, if you give me one more or half
Maybe
a one,
one more.
Okay, thank you. We learned through the pandemic that we dropped child poverty in half with the combination of things that we did there. Funding school lunch, providing tax relief for families, providing payments for families who need it, helping with rent assistance. We solved child poverty. We know how to do this. We know that we can afford it. And think about what kind of world that would be if there was no child sitting in school hungry, no child going to bed at night wondering about what's tomorrow going to bring. That's a dream that I just love to think about, and something that we know is possible now, and we just have to have some willpower to stop making the choice to have children in poverty and children not getting the services that they need.
Well, Representative Mike Baer of Verona, the Democrat incumbent candidate for the 80th Assembly District. The election is November 5th. Thank you, Mike Baer, for talking with WisconsinEye.
Thank you, Lisa. Appreciate your time.
This programming is brought to you by our generous sponsors. Thank you for watching.